Well, that was strange.
Sorry, I was late.
No, that's fine. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 5:04 p.m. Thank you all for being here. First is the approval of the agenda in compliance with Governor McKee's Executive Order 21-59 dated May 27, 2021. We need to have a discussion and a vote whether there is public access to the meeting through adequate and alternative meetings. It looks like do we have anybody, Mike?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I just need a motion to approve compliance, the recognition of compliance, I guess.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 3-0. Next up, approval of minutes from 5/4/2021. If there are no questions, I would ask for a motion.
A motion to approve.
By Ms. Smith,
I will second.
by Mrs. Feather. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Approves 3-0. Next up, discussion and or vote to approve amended policy I-12B, the K-8 proficiency-based grading for the middle school. What we're going to do is we've added a suffix of B to the policy just because we're going to, Tony, you're going to do this over the summer, the elementary policy, or is that coming down the road?
No, the elementary policy will take at least a few years.
Okay.
So their portion of the policy will remain intact until, at least 2 years from now, maybe longer.
Okay, so we may separate the two policies so that each building level has a policy, but for now, this is the way we're going to handle it. So I will just turn it over to Tony and let him discuss the policy itself.
Well, thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give you a real succinct why we're here tonight, and certainly field any questions. Melissa St. Jean had emailed me earlier today. She asked some really good questions. So if you have had a chance to look at the policy or watch the last achievement meeting, you may be here with some questions for either myself or Deb, who's been extremely intricately involved in this, as has Kathy Cardoza and Mike as well. So the why is about 5 years ago, we started on a journey on revamping the entire K-12 standards-based grading system in our district. Many of us got an opportunity to attend the Marzano Institute on standards-based grading, who is a national, maybe world-renowned researcher in the field of education on standards-based grading, among other things. And we knew that we had to make some changes, and that when Cumberland was the first to adopt standards-based grading, it was a pioneer type movement for the district at the time, but we needed to evolve and change. And there were some things that we weren't doing really well, and we needed to go in a different direction and evolve. So it was just time for us to evolve. And we started that process at the high school. It was a 2-year process, a lot of people involved. We were successfully able to change the policy there, and the goal is to have that cohesive K-12 system. We did not have, even though we were practicing standards-based grading, elementary, middle, and high school had very different grading practices in place. And as time goes on, if you're not revisiting this stuff, practices can kind of get out of whack a little bit. And so we took the I-13 high school policy and we struck everything in the former middle school policy was obsolete. Everything, all of its language, everything was obsolete. And where I made the error, and I thank you, Mark, for catching it, is I failed to realize that elementary was part of that policy. So I just kind of struck all that language. But anything that applies to elementary is still in play, except I-12 as it sits in front of you right now is only the actual middle school language.
Yeah, and like I said, we're going to clean that up over the summer, policy-wise. So
yep, that's fine. And I apologize for that. But in any event, we changed everything. We started with re-establishing vocabulary for what assessments mean. You'll see definitions there. You'll see one of the bigger changes is moving to back to a plus and minus system, because we believe that proficiency exists on a continuum, meaning that proficiency for me may look very different than Rachel's proficiency if we did two things of work. She may be closer to more optimal a 4 or more complex understanding of work. So we felt like we needed to distinguish that for kids. And at the same time, we wanted to be able to show their growth and or regression accurately as the curriculum and the rigor goes on with grade level standards during the school year. So we feel like this evolution was the right thing for the district at this time. But in making those changes, those philosophical changes, it led to nearly 3 years worth of work in redesigning assessments, redesigning rubrics, top to bottom. Teachers had PD days that they were able to grapple with the policy and give us feedback. They were involved in the rubric creation back and forth. Deb and Kathy led mapping meetings, and we talked about, principals were involved in it, and all teachers were able to take a look, hopefully were able to take a look, that was the plan, on one of our PD days to give us feedback on the language. So even the language that you see, we receive feedback on from teachers. So with that, we've reestablished vocabulary, we've redesigned every assessment, every rubric for the most part. We have new report card proficiencies. And one big thing that the community needs to understand is standards-based grading is separate and apart from standards-based reporting, right? The grading is the interaction between our teachers and our students, and standards are complex. There's lots of them, right? Parents don't need to know all of that complexity. That's our jobs. That's what we get paid to do. The reporting part is how we decide to represent that in their performance. That's what parents are interested in. And we felt as though we needed to make it simple, but really, really meaningful. So even the proficiencies changed. The language for 4, 3, 2, 1 has changed. It's more authentic to standards-based grading. And that's really the breadth of it. A lot of you'll also see a 12-point scale. That's for precision. In other words, when teachers are scoring work, they're able to use a number system behind the grading system. So let's say, for example, they're being measured against 3 different standards in math. And on one standard, they receive an 8, which is the equivalent to a 3. A 9, which is the equivalent to a 3+, and a 10, which is the equivalent of a 4-. They're really working with the 8, 9, and 10. And within that scale, that's how they're determining proficiency. And when you average those 3, you're going to get a very precise score, and the precise score would be a 3+ over that body of work. Now, traditionalists, people would say, well, you're not supposed to average in a standards-based grading world. Well, teachers in this operating under this system have, when you're looking at a body of work and you say, I'm looking at the preponderance of evidence, what you're doing is you're averaging in your head. You're making a judgment on multiple pieces of work that's extremely subjective. And anyone who would argue differently, I'll argue with you. I'll dance on the dance floor all day long with you on it. It's extremely subjective, especially when you're talking about a whole quarter, whole trimester's worth of work. It's hard for teachers to do. So we wanted to make it more precise for them, and we wanted to make them be able to defend grades a lot more readily in the event that parents would challenge or want to understand more. It's a feedback-laden system and an I-CAN system. An I-CAN system refers to, in a traditional grading system that we grew up in, it was on a 100-point scale, right? So when they averaged on a 100-point scale, the span between 100 and a 0, they would average those 2 grades, it would be a failure automatically, right? If you, in this world, if you average a 12 and a 0, let's say I didn't hand in work, and that's the only way that you can give me a 0, because if I give work, you have to score my work. The score would be a 6, an average score. So that student who gave you an optimal score of a 12 and then didn't do the work, kind of blew off your assignment. Now, when you average it out, the true body of work that the teacher had to work with has to be graded in some way. It's not a 12, it's not a 0. Where is it? A 6. A 6 is not failing. I believe it falls at a 2-. So the student would still be nearing proficiency in an I-CAN system. So it's not a failure-laden system. It's more student-friendly. Okay. I'm going to pause right there because I gave a lot of information, and I've been doing this for 5 years, so I can do it in my sleep. So I'm going to pause there and ask you to, give me feedback or ask questions as you see fit. And Deb is available to answer questions too. Yes, Rachel Rach.
Dr. Santa.
I just, Rachel H, Dr. Santa. I don't know which way to go. I was just going to reiterate that when we're talking about a 100-point scale, that only 40, from 60 up is passing typically on that type of a scale. So out of 100 points, only 40 create passing, and then 60 create a failure. So it's a really antiquated system, and which is why Marzano and et al. Talk about really creating a system where it's more equitable. And I think what you just described, Tony, does that.
Yeah, and remember, a lot of times in our traditional system too, everybody started with 100 and then teachers would mark you down, right? They're working downward from 100. Whereas in our system, it's about what you can do and you're working up the scale and we're telling you exactly, hopefully where they are precisely. And we're able to provide feedback so students can improve. Sounds simple, but it's a complicated 180-degree philosophical shift.
And in ELA, the work that we did in designing what are called the proficiencies, which you'll see on the report card. The first one is, they're year-long standards. So you're going to see a proficiency of reading comprehension. And that's primarily measured through multiple choice questions, some short responses. And then you move up in rigor. Then you look at writing, and then you look at the analysis, which comes from part of the writing score. So for kids who may not be great writers or be able to analyze well, those kids can be successful, the I can, in the proficiency of reading comprehension.
So, and to piggyback on that, this is helping us with our students with special needs who have difficulty with the higher level critical thinking skills and often get stuck at a 1 or a 2 and with no report card after report card after report card, because there's no differentiation. Even though we know they've increased and improved, you can't see it because there's no plus minus, there's no 12-point scale. We can't really define their level of changes in performance finite enough.
So those kids may be very successful under
Right.
reading comprehension,
Right.
and their parents will feel, and they'll feel more importantly, feel good about that.
Yeah, one thing I've always liked about standards-based grading, even the, pseudo version that we were using back in the elementary school days when you were a principal, Tony.
Yes.
I know that wasn't really standards-based, but it had the same kind of feel to the report card. And you could really target what your student was succeeding at and really see what they were struggling with. And I think that's a great tool for parents and for students.
Yeah, we wanted to bring that back. And when we were analyzing our assessments, we were noticing that everything was so high level. All these questions were 5, 6, 7 parts. First of all, how does a teacher tease that out and accurately score that? And then secondly, are we really giving kids an opportunity to scale that mountain, or are we saying you can't analyze, so you're automatically a 1 or 2? So we wanted to get a system that really was student friendly, but also accurate. And would give parents better information about where their kids are. And I think with the nearly 3 years worth of work with the pandemic sort of delaying some of it, it really, really went well. And also all of the content areas have adapted to this system. So we're ready to launch on all cylinders. ELA, science, social studies, math, all the itinerants, art, world language, PE. Everyone has revamped everything. So a lot of work. Credit to everybody who was involved.
Ms. Smith, Mrs. Feather, Ms. Smith.
So-
Go ahead, Carrie.
I was just going to say that this makes sense to me. I'm on board. I think it's great. One question that I had was how any of the curriculum shenanigans that are being pulled at the state level have any impact on this, and if so, what would that be?
Fabulous question. We have obviously created a system that works hand in hand with our current curricular practices and our assessments, right? So if we have to adopt new curriculum, we're going to have to take a look at how those assessments are made. That's why I'm so anti assessments in a box, and why we've gone through years and years of revision, how this sets us back. We're not going to change the grading system. We're going to have to adapt it like we did. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board and adapt the program and the curriculum to the grading system. It has to fit into the grading system. So, it'll just be rolling up our sleeves and starting all over again, falling to the base of Mount Everest again.
Sorry.
No,
Smith?
don't worry. It's a good question.
Thank you for that, Carrie, because that was one of my questions, is how adaptable is the program to different things happening within the state? So that seems fine. So
Could you be more specific about what's happening in the state? I'm not following that.
we have a potential of 3 years of changes in programming and different things that have been rolled out that
Okay.
Tony and his team have to, we're going to be looking at spending the money
Yeah,
and implementing and training, and it could bring us back down. And so the integration of that with our standards versus the state and how the state does things, we need to make sure that they meld well.
Right.
Well, as I build grade, like next year, I'll be working with grades 3 and 4 teachers to map out the new ELA curriculum. We won't be implementing next year. We'll be implementing the following year. But as I build the assessments, because there's loads of resources, I am aware of the rubric language that we need to use as we move forward toward standard-based grading revisions.
Okay, great. So my questions I'm going to put the policy part of this, Mark, just aside for just a little bit. It kind of maybe goes to school committee versus policy in some ways, and we can ask them again at the public meetings. I have never seen this used in a report card. My son was out of school by then. My granddaughter's not at that level yet. So how are we looking at that, and what do we give to the public? Because I certainly would love to see an example report card sitting within this policy, just so that we can see, and then when people are reading it, they have an understanding of it and they can see how it betters the parents or the students in their review. I mean, I have no problems with the standard use here and how we're doing it. I think it's much better. I wish that elementary schools would go to it much faster. Because when you're proficient and you're doing everything correctly and you go in and have one bad test and your report card comes out and it's a low grade, that's just ridiculous. So I'm just wondering now though, how are we going to be looking at this and implementing it? Mark, I think you said, or Tony, you said that they've already built for it, but training's all done with everybody in the middle schools, or?
Yeah, so what we did was, yes. So I'll answer, there's a few parts to your question. So Mike is working, I'll go to the first part of it. Mike is working on, and in fact, there was a very long meeting today with Kathy, the principals, and Mike, and they were hashing out just that, what will be shown on the report card and all the back end work that it takes to have Aspen have the adaptability to that. And then it's going to fall on the auspices of the principals, because remember, we have a whole trimester of time before parents will receive their first quote unquote, report card, right? So the principals will be in charge of communicating some of the changes to the parents, to the parent community, what they can expect, but they're going to see a simplified report card, an easier to understand report card. Our report cards of the past had all this complex standards language that, the lay person that looks at it is like, okay, so I just want to know how my kid did in math. Or algebra, right? So we've simplified the complexity and said, here's algebra 1. Here are the few things that we're going to be looking at: problem solving within algebra 1, fluency within algebra 1, and we're going to grade those things. So it'll be an easy adaptation on the part of parents, and it's just going to take some simple communication from the principals to them. I think the conversion to a 12-point scale with the pluses and minuses, people will automatically equate it to the A, B, C system, A plus, B plus. It's not an apples to apples, but we can say, okay, they can think about it that way. It's not the end of the world. So there'll be an easy, I think, transition for them in thinking along those lines. There was one other part of your question. Can you repeat what you had said at the end?
Well, it's about the implementation with the principals and, like you said, in middle schools, because I understand that they have a trimester to do that. But what kind of training, and are we going to be front loading professional days? I know we talked about it, Mark, and other things, but are we front loading for training?
What kind of training, Carrie? For whom?
For the teachers within those middle schools and implementing this, because now they're looking to more specific topics that are not as much, like you said, the academic part of it, but the student part. So
all that work has already been done. The teachers are ready to go. That's what we've done for the last 3 years. And behind the proficiencies, as Tony called them, in ELA, it's reading comprehension. And behind that reading comprehension score of a 3 or a 2+ your child gets, there are rubrics that are standards based. And teachers can communicate that with the parents, can show them the specific language. So building those rubrics, Carrie, is what took so much time, because I was going back and forth with content leaders and they were going back to their teams at the school, because at the middle school, they're content leaders. They're science, math, social studies, and ELA. So this has been the work that Tony described. We're ready to hit the ground. And at today's report card meeting, Beth Coughlin had built a template of a report card. And then we were working with Mike, going back and forth, mapping the content, he calls them, I think, content rubrics, which is the Aspen language, to what the report card would look like. And that was in an 1.5-hour meeting.
Okay.
All right. I just want to kind of shift this back to the written policy itself.
Right.
Does anyone have any questions on the policy as written? Because I hate to say, but we are a little pressed for time.
All right. How does this compare to the high school one? Because now we're implementing, is it the exact same policy wording as what the high school implemented then?
I think it's more philosophically the same, correct?
Exactly. The skeleton is exactly the same, which we didn't have before. So that's a win for Cumberland, right? That's an important thing, especially as kids rise through the ranks of our system. The difference is the high school is more of a high stakes environment, right? You have GPA involved. That's the main difference, where they get into GPA and that level of specificity. At the middle school and elementary level, we don't want to have high stakes environment per se. We want to have a balanced assessment system. And even though it may be a balanced assessment system at the high school, there are higher stakes involved because of class rank and all those things. So I would say that that's the major difference, the standalone. And then to reference your point about wanting to get the work done at the elementary level, I can appreciate you making that comment. The problem is you're working across 5 schools, right, with 5 principals and many teachers, like 15, 16 first grade teachers versus maybe 8 at the middle school level or whatever. So when you're working across a lot of schools like that, and there's a lot of coordination involved, and we're anticipating that there would be a lot more back and forth. And if some of the practices and habits, it'll take them some time to adapt to the new system and the new grading. And that's going to take a tremendous amount of work. And with everything else that's going on, the other factor, Mrs. Smith, is all of the other things that the state is asking us to do and implement will just slow that work down, because it's sabbatical type work. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And also think about the classroom teachers at the elementary level, for the most part, are self-contained. So one person is responsible for all those content areas.
Right. No, and I appreciate that. I would love to see, I would love to see it eventually, and get out there. To me, it was always the sooner the better for these policies and for implementation, only because it puts all of our schools equal and in a level playing field as well, versus you live here, you live there, that you get all the time, and education differs. And that really shouldn't be the accurate statement being said. So I appreciate that. The only thing I would ask, Mark, with this policy, I mean, I was fine with going through everything. The only thing I would ask is just what had been stated already. This, when I looked at it and said, okay, it says amendments, 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 and it goes back to 2012. I think what we need to do is we need to put back, like you said, the K through 5 one that was there and keep that out there, and then maybe take 5 or 6 through 8 out and then put that as the amendment to the original policy. And then
Yes.
it's
And that's why we're going to leave it.
right.
We'll leave it at I-12B right now, but
Right.
I know that there's certain policies in under I that might move to other headings. So
Right.
before I start doing too much recategorizing, I'd like to be able to kind of do it all as one package.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it follows kind of like some of the basic legal standards or the state standards that are being used with the, you know, no longer active or whatever the wording may be.
Well, no, what we're going to do is, yeah, we'll probably amend the other policy just to bring it as an elementary policy. And then we're going to have to vote on this policy twice in open meeting because it's technically a new policy.
Okay. And have we had legal sign off on this policy? I know it went before the Achievements Committee. Has legal already reviewed it?
Legal for what?
Well, don't we have, I mean, considering it's really more of a new policy than just an amended policy, because it's going to be, the old policy is obsolete and this will replace it. Do we have to have legal review?
Not at all.
Really? Okay. So we're just fine with that. We don't have to worry about anything with the state laws?
No, when it comes to this kind of stuff, there is no state law.
Great. Thanks.
The state law basically gives us full power over policy. You know, as long as we're adhering to other, you know, policies specific to federal laws and state laws and stuff like that. But
Right. And anything that references the state law, do we have our legal then review it just to make sure that it referenced it correctly? Or
yeah, generally Katie does all that kind of work.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Perfect. Thank you.
do we have any other questions on the policy itself? Mrs. St. Jean, did you have your questions answered that you had discussed with Tony?
Yes, I talked to Tony earlier today and he clarified everything. Thank you.
Okay, and do you have any comments on this at this time?
No, I do not.
All right. If we don't have anything else, I'd like a motion to approve or not approve, I guess.
Motion to approve.
I
By
would
Mrs.
like
Feather?
to hold off on approval.
Excuse me?
I would like to hold off until we get it all fixed with the K through 8 and separating and looking at them for a final review.
Well, this policy is going to stay just like it is as I-12B. None of this language will change.
Okay, but so what are we doing? I mean, like, it's going to say amendment at the bottom just for today, but then we're going to put the K through 5 back in separate as I-12A, or that's the only thing I want to make sure, Mark, that it's all done and we're looking at everything equally. So that, I won't second the motion, but that was my discussion. So I would just prefer to hold the vote until we get all of it organized with the rest of K through 8.
The K to 5 piece won't change at all. It literally is apples to apples. So whatever
Right.
you want us to do, Mark, I can talk to Cindy about it and just let me know what you want me to do.
Yeah, maybe you know what, maybe I'll see what we can do. And then on the floor on Thursday, I may make a motion to change the number on it. So it's completely separate. So, but I will, so all in favor of approval? Actually, I'll second the motion. Hang on one second.
And just for discussions purposes, I understand, Carrie, where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I think that for me, my trust level is probably high. So I'm just gonna,
Oh, and it
I'm
has
going with
nothing to
that.
do with trust. I just like to see things clean.
Yeah.
And so I just want to see that separation again, because I wasn't here for the past ones. And when I looked at it, I'm like, look at all these amendment dates, but it's not an amendment. It's all completely different. So I just want to make sure that we have
Sure.
our policies.
I will make
broken
a
out and
motion.
numbered.
I will figure out the numbering before Thursday and make a motion on the floor.
Okay, I
So
will
all in
withhold.
favor of approving this policy?
Aye.
Aye. And those against?
Aye.
Okay,
Nay. And that's fine. I'll approve it on Thursday then, Mark,
sure.
when it's all set. Thank you.
All right, and Tony and Deb can leave if they would like, because I know that Tony has another meeting to go to.
Thank you, guys.
And we will now discuss the A5 inclusion of all students, as it is being called today. That title may actually change. I just lost sight of hang on one second. My entire screen just shifted with people leaving and I'm confused. So, all right. So this is a policy that started off as Kyle's field trip policy, which was to include all students. And then I'd asked her to change the policy just to be an inclusionary policy and kind of just discuss field trips as part of that policy. So this is actually her policy that she wrote, and she's done a lot of work on it. And thank you, Kyle. So I would leave this discussion to Rachel and Kyle. I'll let Kyle start.
Okay, thank you. So yes, that's exactly how I was planning on starting. Back in 2018, I worked as a part of a project, an admin project to develop a field trip inclusion policy based on just wanting to ensure that certain practices were being followed across the district when it came to field trips and making sure that students with disabilities have access and are included for field trips within their needs being considered. So I actually came to policy subcommittee in, I believe it was either September, October. No, just, oh,
I
you're
have
shaking
no
your head.
idea.
Oh, I think it was, I know it was right before election actually. So I'm pretty sure that it was about September, October, 2019. Or could have been 18. I don't know. I've lost track of the dates too. We had a bit of a conversation about the particular, and it was at that point just a field trip draft and policy. And through conversations with Mark and Dr. Santa at the CLAC committee meetings, was asked to kind of make it a shift to have not just specific to field trips, including the information that was originally intended about the field trips, but also to look at just inclusion practices in all extracurricular and activities for students across the district. So my understanding, has everyone seen the draft of that policy? Do you typically, I don't know if you typically present, I'm not sure if you look at it, I have it here in my background, so I'm going to switch away from the camera for a minute.
Yeah.
But
Kyle, if you want to just like kind of go through the policy and talk a little bit about the philosophy behind it, I fully expect that we will table this tonight so
Okay.
that we can kind of do a rewrite. I mean, quite honestly, I need to sit down with probably Cindy and just because we need to kind of like make it look like our other policies, which I have not done yet because I just wanted to see what other changes or additions we want to make to it.
sure,
So-
no, I did do my best to follow a similar format, stating with the purpose and then starting with the purpose of this policy. I did reference the law, section 504 Rehabilitation Act and IDEA, and the law regarding students with disabilities being able to participate in extracurricular activities with non-disabled students to the maximum extent appropriate. And so, I started that policy by referencing the law because this policy, along with many of our other district policies, is just stating it's about the law. Here.
Right. And I did not want that to sound like a criticism. It's probably just me wanting to make sure I dot my I's. So
Sure. No problem.
I like the policy. I think it looks good too. So.
Yeah, but I referenced the law piece because that is in fact, this policy is actually just really stating the law. Like we have there are laws in place that are protecting students with disabilities. However, it's important, as many of our other policies are in the district, they are specifically outlining the law and the practices we must follow in order to make sure we're abiding by those laws. This particular policy is also referencing that. The intent of I also mentioned that the intent of the policy is not to be requiring students with disability to participate in selective or competitive programs. It's not saying, oh, we have to take the students on this team because they have a disability. They're automatically on. If it's a select team, it's not the intent of the policy. But it is also, the intent is to make sure that the criteria is not discriminatory. That, sometimes there are just instances in which students need accommodations and that they can participate in the event or whatnot at the same as other non-disabled peers, sorry. But also additionally that, referencing this piece, and I think that this came up at the last time we did discuss the field trip piece, that part of the legal precedent piece is that it doesn't require an excessive or undue financial burden piece on the district. So it's not to say that, we have to do things that are going to put the district in a significant financial position. Then I do include definitions of the commonly used terms such as co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities, and field trip. And then in my research and going through to develop, looking at what are nationwide other districts have, the specific inclusionary considerations piece I put in here as it should be, these are the questions that should be on people's minds when they're looking at, how to involve or students with disabilities. Obviously from the start, do they have disability? Are they qualified under Section 504 or IDEA? Do they need a modification or accommodation for equal opportunity? Would that particular accommodation modification fundamentally change the activity? So that's an important thing to keep in mind. We don't want to give students unfair advantages. We don't want to have, we want to make sure that it would be the example given here is you wouldn't add an extra base in baseball. That would change the game fundamentally. So
however, if you're having a field trip, you need to make sure that you have a handicap accessible bus.
Correct.
If one of the
Yes.
students has a wheelchair.
Exactly. Correct. Students, that is absolutely, and I reference other accommodations a little bit further down because, and when I was going through and trying to develop, it was definitely easier for me to go with the field trip piece because when you get into the extracurricular and the co-curricular activities, they're just so vast, different because the activities themselves are vast. There's so many, but they're also vast number of different accommodations or students that with disabilities that would participate in. It would be impossible for me to list everything that should be considered. So I do give reference points in that piece where saying, for example, at school dances, and I actually put that language in there, examples of such modifications or accommodations include, but are not limited to, but for school dances and pep rallies and other loud events, we should be considering providing a quiet location or break area for students who want to participate, but may require breaks. Examples in athletic participation that we provide visual cues to alert deaf athletes at the start of a race. So that's an example of an accommodation in a competitive athletic piece where a student who is deaf or hard of hearing who might not hear the starter should not be, if they're an excellent runner and could meet the criteria of running in that competitive race, but not for the fact that they don't know that the race has started because of their disability, then a visual cue should be provided. They should not be excluded from being part of that because they're like, oh, you can't hear, so what are we going to do? We need to be thinking, okay, if we provide this accommodation for the student, then are they able to compete or participate at that same level? That's not to say that we start the race, if it's a 100-yard dash, we're not starting them 50 yards up and saying that's what they're doing, that they get that kind of a advantage in something that's considered to be competitive or things like that.
There's actually a professional football player who is deaf. So
I believe it.
simple accommodations obviously work.
Right.
Mrs. Father?
Yeah. Sorry. So I think actually your example of running and using something visual is excellent, because if you think about other sports, like even soccer, volleyball, whatever, whenever you're actually blowing the whistle, you're also motioning as a ref. So other sports already have that in as part of their as part of what they're doing, even football. But running does not right now. So I think that's a great example. The question that I actually had was about the glucose testing and insulin administration, because I think you might have been part of the team too. When my son was participating in the overnight field trip, there he was not allowed to be given his medication, and so I think about glucose, administration and everything, and I wonder whether or not that's going to run into any kind of issue with the law, because I know that was something that I ran into.
Dr. Santa, would you like to address that? Because I know you know this law quite well.
Yeah, we have to provide reasonable accommodations if it is something that has been provided for all kids. So if you're talking about something that is done by a private company, like the Washington, D.C. trip, although I think you can,
I was talking about Quebec.
Yeah, or Quebec,
Yeah.
Washington.
Neither of which will happen.
There won't happen anymore, because we'd have to pay for every kid to go, essentially, unless there's some type of fundraising. But those type of trips were considered to be from a private company and not necessarily considered to be a school trip. But if it's a trip that all students are attending, we have to provide reasonable accommodation. So if they need a nurse to check glucose, then we provide a nurse. That's really pretty typical for field trips. There's often a nurse that attends a field trip with our kids, all kids, not just our kids with special needs. So that is it. And the reason why this policy, even though it's reiterating the law, and we sometimes think that's particularly redundant, it's a really big reminder to staff to consider these, because what was occurring, the history behind this was not just those type of trips and delineating what those trips are, but it was actually school trips. So let's say, I'm just going to make stuff up because I don't want to ounce anyone. So let's say elementary or high school, let's say all of 5th grade is going to go to a Van Gogh exhibit, just for example. The kiddos, the 5th grade students that were in specialized programs that may not be in that English 5th grade class were not being invited to attend. And I will tell you, in a lot of cases, it was just by accident, right? They didn't really think about it because they weren't sitting in front of them. But I will also tell you, there were some cases where we felt that it was deliberate.
Yes. There were two
that won't be a good one because they're going to be too loud. It's not appropriate, but that's not an individual teacher's decision. That's actually a team decision that should be made. So the reason why this policy came about, it was a project that Kyle was working on for school, and we had this issue, and I'm like, that'd be a great policy to think about and create because of what was occurring. And the other part too, and this is the hard part, and the part that's really hard for school to kind of grapple with, which is if we need to provide a handicap accessible bus, right, in order for all kids to attend that field trip, then we have to provide it. But the cost doesn't come to the special ed department. I don't pay for that trip, that bus, because this department doesn't pay for that bus because it is a trip for all kids. So all those things have to be incorporated into a field trip, which of course increases the price. Now, with the whole thing about us not charging for field trips, that's sort of gone away. But before that, we don't want to invite because then the bus is going to go up. Or people were coming at me saying, how come you're not paying for that bus? Because I can't. If it's something that is for all kids, it comes from general, not from a specialized budget. So, those were some nuances that we're running into, some historical reasons. A lot of the historical reasons are gone now because of the no field trip thing from the state, which in some ways is the great equalizer, right? However, we still felt it was important that people consider these questions when they are developing a field trip, because it absolutely is accidental at times, and at times
99% of the
not.
time.
90% of the time it was accidental. It's really when you think about when all of a grade are going, not a class that's going. That now, and also let's be clear too, that doesn't mean, let's say your child, I had this issue in another district. Let's say your child is 5th grader, but all 4th graders go on this trip. That doesn't mean your 5th grader goes on that 4th grade trip. I had a parent that was picketing and all over the newspapers how her child was denied a field trip when it wasn't for her child's grade. So it goes both ways. You don't get invited to all of them
Right.
just because you happen to be special ed, you know, you get invited to the ones where all kids are. So that's sort of the history behind this a little bit. Sorry, Kyle. I just
Thank
thought-
you so much.
That's,
That was great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was,
and, I mean, I can tell you that this is often a bone of contention for special ed parents.
Oh,
It's come
yeah.
up several times in
Yes.
the advisory meetings, and it's heartbreaking, quite honestly.
and you know, so I mean, I will say I had 2 instances at two different schools, 2 different levels, really in a relatively short period of time where I was just like,
Yeah.
That's how she came to my office.
you know, I
That's how I leave your office.
but also, I mean, I would like, obviously there's specific accommodations that are going to come up for different students, but I also think that it's important that for these particular activities, for any of these activities, that we look at a more universal design for learning approach. So that means that we shouldn't be waiting for these students to need these to make them available, because you know, I think Carrie, you said the piece with the athletics and the visuals, like, why do we have to wait for someone to be hard of hearing to include that visual signal? Let's have that from the get-go. You never know who may be like, oh, look, I can do that because they're already doing that. I noticed that. You know what I mean? It shouldn't, the same thing, I put a piece for like school clubs. I said, you know, an example for something with school clubs would be, you might allow speech to text or predictive text for students to be involved with, or students with visual impairments to be a part of the school newspaper. They should know, hey, that's available. I can be a part of that. It doesn't matter that I struggle to read or write. They have this accommodation here for me available. I can be a part of this. I don't need to fear, you know, my limitations and shy away from joining. That's we don't want that. We want people to use that. And in some cases, there are, like, you're not going to necessarily hire a school nurse to be on standby to glucose test people if they are just, you know, but that's maybe a little more specific to a student. But I think that a lot of these particular accommodations can be there, you know, made available, ready for students even before they're requested, because I think that that's just saying, hey, we have these things here. Come on, don't be shy. Come join us. We want you to be part of our greater school community, because, and we preach this at all of our IEP meetings, that especially when I talk about transition, this time of year, we're talking a lot with our 8th graders going into 9th grade. We talk about transitioning and we say, get involved. CHS has over 80 clubs. And, you know, the more you're involved with your school community, the more you feel motivated, the more you feel connected, and the more you feel connected, the more successful you're going to be with the academic piece. And that may be specifically very challenging for some of our students with disabilities. And so if they have something that they're going to school feeling passionate about, even if it's like, oh, I just have to make it to 1:30 because then I have this club or that club, then that's what drives them to go to school. And that is what is going to make them successfully finish. And that's going to move up our participation rates. That's going to increase our graduation rates. It's a benefit all around.
And it gets people thinking in a different way. And it raises a lot of awareness. And that's just something I think we could all use. So do we have any questions on the policy itself, Miss Smith?
Yes, I think the grit of the policy is fine. I don't have any issues with that. And Mark, thank you, because I do think that this is a little cleanup to make it equivalent to some of the other policies, as you talked about, not in a negative way. Everything is here that needs to be here.
Yeah, I also want the special ed community to really have a chance to really look at the policy and weigh in on it before we vote on it.
Right. Okay. So the only question I do have then is to the points that were just discussed specifically. And do we have those procedures written? Are they somewhere already in place on providing and knowing if you have a deaf student participating in an activity? You know, how is that already incorporated? So if it's not being used every single time to Ms. Feather's point of the hand motions that you see with some of the referees, is there a procedure behind the scenes that is written that's in the schools on how to manage it if you have that situation come up and everybody's aware of all of those different things?
I know at the high school level, most of those sports are controlled by the Interscholastic League.
Yeah.
And they seem to be pretty progressive. I'm not familiar. I don't know if Dr. Santa, or maybe Kyle knows about what the Interscholastic League speaks to regarding all that type of thought. But this is a conversation we can definitely have with our AD.
Yeah,
Mr. Blanchard.
I mean, they do talk about inclusionary practices. They're actually more progressive than a lot of
Yeah.
districts were. I mean, when you talk about even like it's a different policy, the transgender policy, half of that came from what the Interscholastic League was already doing.
Right.
So they are very inclusive. As far as like, I got a little bit confused when you said about, as far as say like policy or that, or procedures. When we're talking about special ed procedures, that's all part of accommodations, but then there's ADA procedures, that's part of all of school that people should be fairly well versed. Again, the reason why we reiterated it in this one is just to have a common understanding that this is what we're expecting people to do every single time. And I do like the universal design of just create it that way. We don't need to have someone needing it right away.
Would it make sense? Would it be would it be a practice to put something in here where, if I think that it would be if you have if your child has specific needs to contact either your building principal, or because I think that in some cases we would want them to touch base with like a point person to find out if certain things were available or could be made available. And so that may be your coach, if it's an athletic, or an athletic director, if it needs to go up the chain a little bit, or, at the building level, like, obviously each building has their own different extracurricular or co-curricular activities. And so, what they have available and what accommodations are available or can be made available would certainly be specific to what they have available, and the building principal would know that better than I would hesitate to say call Dr. Santa, because she's not going to be familiar with every single event and club in every single school. And so I think that starting with your building principal would be good. And then if they're like, oh, I don't know, they always can field it back up to Dr. Santa if they're feeling unsure if that's something that can be done or whatnot.
Well,
that often happens.
Coordinate.
I often talk to principals about, they're like, hey, we're thinking of this. What do you think? Or what do you see? Is there a problem here? Or this is what we're thinking. Or we think this might be a problem. They actually have gotten really good about they're well-educated folks. They figure it out themselves. But then when they get a little bit confused or questioning, they do call all the time.
And I think that a lot of the standard language I've seen in the policies that we've been updating or we've been reviewing has been with that point person, whether that's a superintendent and his, her, or they, them opportunity to pass it down the line or whatever it may be. So I think, Mark, that's probably going to be with some of your language things to make it even anyway. So maybe that will help manage that whole situation. But
I think the simplest thing
about the field trips, though, I think, because we're hoping at some time that we do, or we are able to. And I think like the Adams Farm trip every single year that's been taken, that has been inclusive all along. But to Mrs. Feather's point, if they're out there for an amount of time, and is there a nurse available, or is there somebody available for glucose? That's a very, very good point.
Yeah.
So
we sent a nurse. We send a nurse on that particular trip. Or how about? But just to let you know, like I'm more concerned about bus, because last time the bus forgot to come back to get them.
Yeah, that I remember.
That's another story. We're
Family
gonna have to
work on the farm. I was there for the field trips, and I helped push some of the wheelchairs through the corn maze and had fun. So
we had a conversation
awesome.
last time about a beach trip too, though, and they were talking about, it's not right. The terrain is not going to be right for students who have mobility issues, but we were kind of like, well, but why are you going to that beach then? Can we not choose a different beach that has better access? Like why, and those are things that need to be thought of, like, that might not be good. You're thinking about this as a reason to potentially not have them join the trip. I would challenge you to think of will then change your location.
That's
What
right.
is the objective of your trip? Can that be done at a place that's more accessible to the students?
Right,
Yeah,
and I
and
think
quite
that's what I
honestly-
want to make sure of in the policy or however we do it, that there's procedures behind the scenes, because I think that all school committees and all people related to schools are going to be under a great deal of scrutiny, especially later in the summer and going into next year, in light of everything that's happened here in Rhode Island with some other districts, and people challenging policies or requesting information. I just want to make sure that if somebody questions this, we have a procedure to back it up, and that there's a very quick, this is how we can enact it. And
I guess I would, sorry, Carrie.
No, that's
I-
okay.
What I would recommend is that it's part of we take a look at the field trip approval form. Do you know like how, I don't know what we call
yeah,
it that,
that's
but
a good
whatever. So that they has all students been considered, like it could be part of a checklist almost.
And
Yeah.
so I believe, and I have to double check because I haven't read, it's been a while since I looked back at that language, but I believe that there is language in the field trip section about,
So too.
or no, so in our own field trip policy, that particular piece has language about how to the procedures you do to get going a field trip. And so if there's a form that needs to be filled out, then yes, maybe. So that's part of a procedural, not the policy is the policy, the procedure being how we follow the policy. I think that those forms would need to be looked at again and including information in there that makes sure that this doesn't get skipped, that this isn't overlooked, that this part
Yeah,
of
as much as I hate to say it, we're going to have to review the field trip policy because it's obvious that the state legislature is incapable of solving this problem. Because every time they propose a new law to it, all they do is rehash what's already there,
Mhm.
which I find very disappointing. So we're just going to have to go on with it. And quite honestly, some of the PTOs, and I hate to say it because it's going to probably anger some people, but what the hell do I care? The PTOs are going to have to suck some of this up. Really. I mean, I've had conversations with different PTOs and they're just going to have to understand that this is going to be a very important part of what they are doing for local field trips. So, and I know, Kyle, that you need to leave because you have an
actually,
event.
the thunderstorm changed the afternoon activity schedule. I'm not in a rush anymore.
Okay. So if we have any more questions for Kyle while we're here,
I have a comment.
who's that?
So- Melissa.
Oh, Melissa. Hello, Melissa.
Hi. So when we're talking about the PTOs, that is very crucial because they are our sole funding for field trips at the elementary school. The last time we had one, it was right after we had done the field trip policy for students with disabilities. And I mentioned it to my principal, who then talked to the PTO. And I think it was a little shocking that they're like, oh, we have to do that for every grade. And that could mean a specialized bus for potentially every grade. So it really became, it's going to really change the way we do things. And if we even get funding, because we can't expect teachers on top of everything they teach to then fundraise, because that's just not going to happen. So a lot of this lies in the hands of the PTO. So it really needs to be very clear to them what this policy is.
I'd agree with you, Melissa.
I agree, but I also hope that I hope that they keep all kids in mind when they're thinking about this and that they don't shy away from trying to make it work.
They have to.
Just because it's disheartening to think that you would lose support because they feel that they can't help students with disabilities participate.
Well, I will tell you what we do. We tend to try to do walking field trips. So we have the monastery next door. We try to do something where we can, do something without a bus if that's possible. So I know the teachers really try to think outside the box when it comes to that. But we also have to understand that these PTOs, they change every so many years and you have new people coming in and they're not thinking about the specialized programs. I mean, they just don't. So I think it's just a thing that we have to make sure that principals are making them aware that, inclusion is important at all levels.
I think having this policy should help with that because the PTO needs to follow the policy.
That's right.
So that's right. So that I think is very helpful having this written.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Feather.
Thanks. Yeah, and part of the couple things that I just wanted to say also, and it's been a little while since I've been on a PTO board, but when I was on it, I know that, the number one reason we did fundraisers was to fund field trips. So, we also, we had the different events and everything, and community was a part of it. But I think that hopefully they understand that funding field trips and being inclusive is really why they're there. But the other, to the other point where you're mentioning turnover, right? On as parents age out or kids age out and parents leave the PTOs, it might be a good thing for us to bring up with the various PTOs to include in their bylaws some language around being inclusive. So I know that I was part of the bylaws review for Cumberland Hill, and back then I don't think I thought of it to look for that. So.
I also don't know if it's possible to add to the, can it be reviewed? Can that be the first PTO meeting of the year? Can this be reviewed? And as a reminder, just a practice to be as a mindful reminder in case there are new people. So it's kind of like right out of the gate, hey, we're getting ready. Going to be a good year. Let's not forget this when we're planning.
Yeah, and aside from bylaws, they should have a playbook for the board to be able to look and go, okay, we're going to plan a field trip. What do we need to do? Here's all the information.
Right.
So I would think that some have it. Dr. Santa?
I'm just going to say that there's also some problem solving that can happen, right? Because not every kid needs a specialized bus just if they come in a specialized bus to school.
That's
So
right.
we've been able to work as a team, work with the family to say, no, for this trip, they don't need to come. Yes, their major transportation may be a minibus in and out of school, but they don't necessarily need it for this particular field trip. Obviously, if they're in some type of device, a wheelchair, transportation stroller are becoming a little more common for some of our kids who are unsteady. Yes, then they do need those hookups. But there's ways that we can talk to families and make sure that for this kind of field trip, they may or may not need it. We've also had parents who volunteered to be the like a chaperone almost and brought their kid to it. So we sometimes are able to negotiate that so that they're included, but they're also the excess extreme cost isn't there because the buses are very expensive. I had a bus that just went down the street and it was like $200. It's just down the street.
We can't require the parents. We can't say,
no,
well, if you
we
want
wouldn't,
Johnny to participate, then no, I know. And I know a lot of families have been, I know that back when we could go to field trips, we would go to lake compounds, and we had families who said, we had families who said, you know what, I'll go, I'll chaperone, I'll drive so-and-so there because I'm not sure he's going to last all day. It's a long day. It's hot, and we say, oh, you sure? That'd be great. And they're there, their kids are having fun, but they may head out at halfway through the day because otherwise it's a long 2-hour bus ride and they've gotten overstimulated or overheated. I feel those things at those places, so I could totally understand. Yeah,
but this will raise awareness and really get people to solve the problem and to work with the special ed department on what can be done. I mean, every building has either the special education teachers that are with those kids every day and they can help solve the problem, or the coordinators or Dr. Santa's office. So there's plenty of help in the way of figuring out these issues. They just have to do it. Any other discussion? No? Then
I don't see any hands from the public. In case you didn't know, I took over for Mike. So I do not see any hands up from our attendees.
Yeah. I will. Yeah. If anybody wants to make a public comment, I know there's a couple of members of the public in. I would take those at any time, really. But otherwise, I will ask for a motion to table this policy.
Motion to table, but it's an excellent policy.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Yes, Kyle, thank you so much. She has done all the heavy lifting on this one from start to finish. And it's a process that's been taking, what, 2.5 years? Maybe
Yep,
3?
about May 2018 was when I finished the first draft.
And Kyle, what did I say to you? What did I say
It
to
would
you?
take a while. They told me it would take a while.
Did you get an A? That's what we really want to know. Did you get an A
Nice
on the
job,
project?
Kyle.
She got her
It's like-
master's. I mean, really, yeah.
Yep, I got an A. But that was, I probably could have done far less work and got an A, but I wanted it to make a difference. So.
And you do every day. Next up is consideration of policies to create or review for future agendas. I really don't have anything at this time. I know we have a pretty busy summer. Dr. Santa's waving her finger at me.
I do have one, just need to raise my hand. I do have one I'd like us to do in the fall regarding preschool lottery. Just a general policy, then with a backup procedure. So just
Okay.
put that in the docket, not over the summer, please. We're completely,
No,
I'm
there's
completely
too much policy
inundated.
right now.
I have about 200 kids come to ESY and a whole bunch of summer meetings that we have to do, a whole bunch. So if we could do fall, that'd be fantastic.
No, that's fine because we have a couple of heavily legal based policies that are
Yeah,
going to get
do
done over
those
the summer.
first. Yeah.
So
Yep. That'd be perfect. But I want to put it on your radar that because we're getting questions about kids being put on a wait list. And then, so we have a lottery. If you don't get in the lottery, you go on a wait list. The lottery is dumped by random number generation.
and that's only for the peer group.
Whatever,
correct?
for peer groups. Yeah. Not for our special kiddos. Special kids are in. And then we do that by random number. But the problem that what's happening is that kids get on a wait list. And then if they want to go the next year, they have to go back in the lottery. So we've had some questions about, my kid's been on a wait list for 2 years. How come they've been on the wait list for 2 years? Because you have to put your name back into the lottery every year.
Yeah.
So, and also not understanding that the preschool is not a statewide preschool. We don't have the space for a statewide preschool. I've already looked at that. It is not a Head Start. It is not a general public preschool. It is really a public school preschool to provide inclusionary opportunities for kids with special needs. So
Yeah.
that's what it is right now. So that's what that is.
One day, that's the goal when we have the new preschool, correct?
Yeah, the space should work out as long as Alex hasn't nixed the bathrooms that are scheduled to be put in there. If
Well,
he's
speaking as
nixed,
somebody that's on the building committee, the bathrooms are going in. So.
you have to have 2 bathrooms for a preschool. If it's going to meet the requirements, that means it could be in between. What we had talked about is putting bathrooms in between the classrooms so that each classroom has the access to 2 bathrooms. That's perfectly fine. But I had heard him make a little offhand comment a little while ago saying, oh no, those bathrooms are not in. Well, then you're going to leave us really in trouble for preschool being up there because we have to have that way.
Oh.
And as someone who has an office right now in the transition building, I can tell you that the bathrooms are very far away, and I can't imagine some 3-year-olds making it that far because
Yeah.
The preschool won't be built for another few years.
Yeah.
So we've got plenty of time.
I'm thinking
to break.
5, but I mean,
plenty of
there are
time.
plans out there, and the plans out there are to meet the standard, the EDGAR standards, and the builders absolutely know the EDGAR standards. And I said, listen, we have to have the space right, we have to have the bathrooms right, we have to have the footage on the playground right, or we're not going to meet some of these standards where we could actually be a ranked preschool, like a Bright Star or a state preschool. There are things that we could do. If I was able to open up a state preschool, we would have gotten $190,000 worth of funding.
Yeah.
But we don't have a space. We can't meet the criteria.
All right.
Anyways, that's for another time.
If
Really.
there's no, I'm going to officially public comment. Rachel, is that Mr. DeMonico with his hand up?
Yes, Mr. DeMonica has his hand up.
Okay.
Here we go. Mr. DeMonica?
Hi, Rachel. Has anyone made the building committee aware, especially the architects, of the needs for the preschool children, like the bathrooms that we're talking about here? That because if they're coming in to do the transitional building starting next week.
No. That's going to happen when they actually build the trans building for the preschool. That's when that'll happen.
Yeah, but why spend money twice if we know we need to put these bathrooms in and they're going to be in there gutting that building anyways? Even if they put the piping in and cap it off, because the architect will know where it's going to go, they should be aware of this.
Paul,
You know, we don't have a bundle of funds.
It
Well,
was
I'll
on the.
ask- I'll ask Holly Demers from college.
It was on the architectural plans that I looked at.
Yeah, that's all. I agree. We should let Holly Demers know so that Ann Lewis Torado know as well that when the preschool comes in, we don't want to be spending a lot of money to be adding bathrooms for the preschool kids. That's
I'm
all.
going to take the part of the lawyer, and I'm going to say that we're entering dangerous territory. We're just entering too far off the agenda. So,
Okay.
However, noted.
yes. Thank you, Paul.
I don't see any other public comment.
Okay. In that case, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. I'll take your job, Mark.
Motion by Ms. Smith,
Second.
second by Mrs. Feather. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We stand adjourned at 6:14 p.m. Thank you very much for everything, for everyone, for everything. And I will take care of the K-8 situation before Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.